Good evening. I'd like to call our regular council meeting on Monday, September 23rd to order at 6 o'clock p.m. And good evening to staff members in attendance this evening, and good evening to members of the public in attendance, and to those who may be watching the meeting via our live web stream. I'm Mayor McNeil Smith. Two of our council colleagues, Councillor Novick and Councillor Rentoul, are not in attendance this evening with other commitments. And to my far right, we have Councillor Duncan, Councillor Garnett, and two of our colleagues participating online. Good evening, and please confirm your audio. Good evening to Councillor O'Keefe.
Good evening.
And good evening, Councillor Duck.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening. Our council procedures bylaw, which guides our procedures during our council meeting, was amended coming out of the pandemic. During the pandemic, the provincial government allowed us to make amendments with regards to whether council could participate in person or virtually. And we amended our procedures bylaw coming out of the pandemic. And one of the amendments that we made is that we have a minimum of 4 council members in attendance in person at council meetings going forward. I can't remember the exact rationale at the time. I can remember a time when I was the only one in attendance, or there was only a couple, but that was an amendment we made at the time, and I would like to make a motion that we waive that requirement for a minimum of 4 council members in attendance for this evening's meeting. If I can have a seconder?
Second.
Second by Councillor Garnett. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? That motion carries. Thank you. Next, turning to the territorial acknowledgement, I want to acknowledge respectfully that we are holding this evening's meeting, and indeed the entire town of Sydney is in the territory of the Wasanich people, and we want to acknowledge the Sayote Nation, the Sartlup Nation, the Pakwachin Nation, the Sycam Nation, and the Malahat Nation. In turning to number 3, approval of the agenda, we do have 2 changes this evening. The first is we have 3 new pieces of correspondence for members of the public since the agenda was published last Thursday. And I will note the 3 have been received from Dennis Carlson on behalf of the Sydney Community Association, by Pat Bastone, and by Jim Spence. They are all in regards to item 6B, which is the development application on 5th Street. And those items will, under this amended agenda, fall under that agenda item 6B. The second item is I'm pleased that Councillor Duck was able to attend Sydney Tree Appreciation Day on Saturday in my absence. And I'm pleased that Councillor Duck has asked to provide an update on Tree Appreciation Day, and that councillor report will come under 11A councillor reports. And I would look for a mover and seconder that our agenda be approved as amended.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? The motion carries. Thank you. We're now turning to number 4, public participation, where we provide an opportunity at the beginning of each meeting for members of the public to come forward to speak to council. We ask those that do come forward to please provide your name, the municipality you reside in, or the organization that you represent, and you will have 4 minutes to speak to council. And so for a first time, is there anyone wishing to come forward this evening? Please come forward. There is just a button to turn on a red light, activate the mic, and please feel free to adjust the mic as it suits you.
Good evening, Mayor and Councillors. This is with regard to agenda item 6B, and I also sent you a letter. My name is Pat Bastone, and I live in Sydney at 9675 5th Street with my partner John and my little dog Sydney. Our home, which I have owned since 1979, is the neighboring property to the north of the proposed development at 9667 5th Street. I'm here to ask you to please not give approval to the 5 variances to Sydney's bylaws requested for this development. I'm especially concerned about the building height variance. The new building would essentially be a large box which would loom over our little house and yard, and being on the south side would block out sky and sunlight. The taller this building is, the worse this effect would be. I realize that more housing is needed, but these dwellings need to be livable by leaving room for green space. Why can't this development be designed so that it fits the amount of land without needing 5 variances? I think the densification that the province's Bill 44 allows for is enough change to our neighborhood without exceeding Sydney's bylaws. This seems like over-densification. I can hardly imagine so large a building and a parking lot for 8 vehicles on this small piece of land. I don't think this proposed building is very attractive, and it doesn't fit in well with surrounding homes. The houses on each side are just one-story buildings. I don't think it's a good look for being on a main entryway into our town, which the Sydney BIA describes as charming. Please, Mayor and Councillors, give careful consideration to keeping our neighborhoods livable and breathable. Thank you for your attention and for listening to my concerns.
Thank you for coming forward this evening and for your letter that we did receive. I'll call for a second time if, please come forward. Good evening.
Hello, Mayor and Council. My name is Niall Peltiel, resident of Central Saanich with Island View Land Management. I do represent both items 6A and 6B on tonight's agenda. Seeing no correspondence from 6A and with the feedback received from 6B, I thought it would be prudent to just basically come and just provide a very short overview on some of the key changes and matters pertaining to this application. Number one, with respect to variances, the setback variances, both for parking in the rear as well as the front steps, are rear parking variances specifically just to deal with the need for width within the drive aisle. It was engineering's request that we come up with a turn radius that gets to a 7.5 meter drive aisle, which meant that we did need to, we still screen, but it basically meant that we needed to broaden the parking stall slightly. The front step height variance is to accommodate the general height variance, which, as was previously discussed at the regular council meeting and then was addressed at the advisory design panel meeting, is really to meet that balance between the required minimum recommended by our professional engineers with respect to the geotechnical flood construction level, while still ensuring that the intent of the design reflects a roughly a 2.5-story building. I understand that this is also an item that I'll just say other applications in Sydney are currently grappling with, and the nuance between designation of height versus flood construction level, I know is going to be one that the town of Sydney grapples with going forward. The second piece with respect to side yards and green space, when the application was initially brought forward with staff, the RM5 zone of the day supported a 1.5 meter side yard setback. Upon adopting the OCP as well as the new zoning bylaw, a 2 meter side yard setback was introduced. Initially coming to council, I managed to come up with a compromise that meant that we went to a 1.68 meter side yard variance, which brought us closer to the 2 meter side yard setback. Following the feedback at advisory design panel, council asked and I obliged to increase the side yard setback through a minor redesign to get the building to a 2 meter side yard setback. The side yards are now compliant with the land use bylaw, and ultimately the height variance is a very minimal increase from what the current height allowance is. The matter of density was brought up both a couple of times at council as well as at the ADP and in some of the correspondence you've received this evening. I think it's really important to understand that the analysis was done by Cumming Design, the designer that we've hired to do this project, and our density is still 0.2 at a floor space ratio or FSR under the allowable density within the zoning bylaw. This density at about approximately a 1 FSR is still very commonly in keeping with typical townhouses as seen in the town of Sydney and as seen in other municipalities across the region. I appreciate the feedback so far. We've maintained changes to building roof lines, to parking, to accessible parking, to bike stall layouts, and to bike storage and garbage and refuge storage as working to address council's concerns as well as the concerns of the public. And we're really happy with where this development application has landed. And I think it has demonstrated a willingness to evolve and adapt to the changing requirements and the needs of the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Just for the benefit of those who came in after we began public participation, we are in our public participation period where members of the public can come forward and address council for up to 4 minutes. And so I certainly want to offer that opportunity for anyone who may have come in after we started that. So I will call for a second time if there's anyone else wishing to come forward to address council. And I'll call for a third time, anyone wishing to come forward. Seeing none, I will close our public participation period, and thank you to those who came forward. I'm now turning to section 5, which is bylaws. The first 3 bylaws under 5A, 5B, and 5C are with regards to permissive tax exemptions, and council did consider a number of applications for permissive tax exemptions at our committee of the whole meeting on September 3rd and at our council meeting of September 9th, and we did approve a number of permissive tax exemptions, and these bylaws are the formal process by which those exemptions will be in place over the next, and for most of these for the next 10 years, and for one of them for the next 2 years. And so we are going through a process this evening where we are giving first, second, and third reading, and council votes on moving each of these forward. When council does give readings to bylaws, typically we pass the first reading with just a vote, and the second reading after the vote, or before the vote, we can ask if council members have any questions or comments, and then we take the vote, and then we just do the third vote. All of these, if they do pass first and second and third reading this evening, and you'll see us perhaps go through that fairly quickly, all 3 of these bylaws will come forward to a future council meeting for council to consider adopting them, that is, completing the process. And so I will turn to my 2 colleagues in the chamber this evening to perhaps help us walk through this. If I could look for a mover and seconder on the bylaw number 2279.
I'll move that bylaw number 2279, permissive tax exemption 2025 to 2034, be given first reading.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? Motion carries.
I move second reading.
Second.
Any discussion or comments? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? Motion carries.
And I'll move third reading.
Second.
All in favor? The motion carries. Thank you. And this is, I'll let you go ahead.
Sure. I'll move that bylaw number 2280, permissive tax exemption 2025 to 2026, be given first reading.
Second.
All in favor? The motion carries.
Move second reading.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
And I'll move third
Motion
reading.
carries.
Sorry. I'll move third reading.
Second.
All in favor? Thank you.
And I'll move that bylaw number 2281, permissive tax exemption 2025 to 2034, be given first reading.
Second.
All in favor? The motion carries.
Move second reading.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Move third reading.
Second.
All in favor? That is approved. So as I indicated at the beginning, those will come back to council for final adoption at a future meeting. I'm now turning to item 5D on the agenda, bylaw number 2282, with regards to a housing agreement at 2180 Beacon Avenue West. And I will turn to Ms. Verhagen for an introduction, please.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. This bylaw is to enter into a housing agreement for the town of Sydney between the town and the property owner of 2180 Beacon Avenue West. It sets out the terms and conditions for securing long-term rental housing and below-market rental housing, as was discussed during the development application for this property. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Verhagen. And so we do have a similar process to go through first, second, and third reading. Before doing that, I will ask council members if they have any questions, since this is the first time the housing agreement is coming before council. Councillor O'Keefe, you have the floor.
Thank you. Some of this was covered in emails with staff today, but just to confirm some of this. In regards to adaptable units, we had discussed allocating some of the adaptable units into the below market units. And my recollection at the time was that that could be discussed when the housing agreement was being brought forward, which it is today. And so my question to staff is, do we still have the option to amend the agreement to state that a certain number or percentage of adaptable units be included in the below market allocation?
I'll turn to staff. Ms. Verhagen.
Thank you. I'm not sure if Mr. Edwards wants to speak to this first. I'm happy to start and turn it over to him after.
Mr. Edwards.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor, for the question. So through the chair, I'm not entirely clear on how much discussion there was about the adaptable units in the remainder of the building outside of the affordable units, but I think it might be a bit late at this stage to be requesting the developers to reconsider changing the plans to allow for that, and if that wasn't the original intent. So I think we may need to go back to the developer to get clarity on about whether or not that would be achievable or not.
Thank you. I'll turn back to Councillor O'Keefe.
Yeah, so my understanding is that this development, that they were providing 20% of the units were to be adaptable. And I just want to clarify with staff that that was their understanding as well, is that in our zoning bylaw, that was a requirement that 20% of units in multifamily dwellings be adaptable. And I believe that was going to apply to this development as well. So my understanding is that we're not asking them to redesign, we're just asking them to allocate some of those units as below market units.
If I could just clarify for a moment, Councillor O'Keefe, your first part of your question was a new question in terms of, was there a requirement for 20% adaptable units in the original, during the original application? And I will come to the second part of your question in terms of adaptability.
Okay.
And that, so I would turn to staff if they could comment.
Yeah, I think I need your input.
Ms. Verhagen?
Sure, thank you. Through the mayor, the zoning bylaw does require 20% of the units to be adaptable design in terms of the floor plan and the layout of the units. That is required in the building, and it's part of the development permit that council approved earlier this year. In the housing agreement, that Schedule A to this bylaw that we're considering right now, 2.2.3 says the owner shall use its best efforts to market and rent below market units to eligible tenants at the same ratio of the overall unit type of the building. The intent there is the unit type being 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom units, but there will also be adaptable units in the building. So that could be part of the discussion on that. Just one note is that the more restrictions that we place in the housing agreement, the more difficult it is to enforce and for them to rent out the units over time. So that's something to be cautious about. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Verhagen. Councillor O'Keefe, do you find that helpful?
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. Thank you. I didn't realize that the unit type also applied to the adaptable units. So it sounds to me like it's covered off there. So yeah, I'm satisfied with that. I have a couple other questions, if I may.
Please, go ahead.
So my understanding from staff is that it doesn't sound like we have, well, first of all, in terms of the monitoring, my recollection was that we were going to have the CRD appointed as a monitor for this because they have more experience with housing agreements. My understanding now is that the town will take that on. I'm just wondering why we've switched from CRD to thinking that we're better to monitor that on our own.
Thank you. I'll turn to Mr. Edwards.
Thank you for the question, Councillor, and through the mayor, it's my understanding that the CRD was initially keen to be involved in this project and in that role. However, they've backed away from it over the course of the summer, I believe, and I would ask if Ms. Verhagen has any additional details that are relevant, but my understanding is the CRD is not going to come back to the table for this.
Ms. Verhagen.
Thank you. Through the mayor, yes, that's my understanding too. Is originally the CRD had indicated that they would act as the monitor for this agreement, but they're no longer interested in doing that. So the town will be doing that. But the agreement is worded in a way that at any point during the term of the agreement, the town could appoint a monitor. So in the future, if the CRD is interested or another party is interested, then the town has that option to appoint a monitor.
Okay, thanks for that. I also had some concerns, as I mentioned in a previous email, about the agreement says that the owner shall use its best efforts to market and rent the below market units to eligible tenants. And if they can't find a suitable tenant, they can rent it out as a market unit. And my understanding is that there's no sort of guardrails or limit on the number of units that they could convert to upmarket units. And it seems that we have very little option to enforce the housing agreement. I'm wondering, did we look into, in terms of other housing agreements in the CRD or elsewhere, what sort of leverage do we have to enforce this housing agreement once it's in place?
I'll turn to staff.
I'll take it. Thank you, Councillor, and thank you, Mayor. I'll take a stab at the first part of the question there, but we'll turn to Ms. Verhagen for the second part. There is a 90-day period in which the owner of the facility does need to honor before they would turn away from the affordable market to look at replacing that with a market tenant. So it's not an immediate conversion if they can't find somebody for the below market rate. They do have a waiting period that has to expire before they can shift. In terms of enforcement, there are some, the agreement in and of itself will be placed on title as a covenant, and so it is a legally binding agreement that the municipality can enforce if it's brought to our attention that is not being adhered to. And there is requirements within the agreement for annual reporting out on the affordable unit rentals, and so there are some good provisions in the agreement that would hold the owner accountable, but I would turn to Ms. Verhagen for any more details on that regard.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you. I have nothing to add.
Thank you. Councillor O'Keefe, you still have the floor.
And I think this is the last one of this, and this one I hadn't asked staff in advance, but I was thinking about other housing agreements that the town has administered in the past. I think there was only one, but if staff could comment on other similar housing agreements we've had in the past, and kind of what our experience had been on that in terms of getting the developer to comply on an ongoing basis with the terms of the agreement.
I'll just add to that slightly, if I might. Is there a precedent for a housing agreement with a for-profit developer? Ms. Verhagen.
Thank you. In 2016, the town entered into a housing agreement with a society for the development. I'm not sure why there's feedback. The development at 9830 4th Street. the Aranza building. It's on the block of 4th between Beacon and Sydney Avenue. We haven't heard any issues with that agreement. It was not with a private developer, it was with a housing society, but it was 2016, so I can't recall the details of that agreement specifically. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's good. That's fine for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Keefe. I'll turn to Councillor Gurnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to staff, just to follow up on the question that Councillor Keefe asked. Did the CRD give any indication as to why they were pulling back from what they initially thought they might do?
Thank you. Yes, my understanding is that this housing agreement, the proposal that was made by the applicant and was endorsed by the town through the development review, was that the below market units would be offered at a rate of 20% below market value. The CRD indicated that the typical housing agreements that they see have the rent levels set based on BC housing income limits set by BC Housing. So it's a reverse way of calculating rent limits. And at the time, they were not able to enter into an agreement to monitor something that was different than using those HILS numbers, the HILS numbers that they see in other agreements. That was my understanding.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor Duck.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to follow up on a couple of points Councillor Keefe made regarding the monitoring and enforcement of this document. As the town of Sydney is now taking on the monitoring of it, and it appears that monitoring is relatively an annual event of giving a list of tenants and their occupants of the different areas. I only see under section 6.18 that the remedies for this are very loosely worded, that there doesn't seem to be any consequence if the owner does not continue to provide 20% accommodation for below market. Is there something I'm missing here relative to more stronger remedies or enforcement of the document if it's not met? Thank you.
I'll turn to Mr. Edwards or Ms. Verhagen.
Yeah, as was previously indicated, housing agreements can be challenging to enforce over time, but it is a contract between two parties, so one would expect that professional best practices and best efforts would be made to follow that agreement. And again, because it's a contract, parties can turn to the courts to help them enforce their agreements. So the town would have that option in the future if things don't go as is set out in the agreement.
Councillor Duck.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no further questions, we do have 3 readings we can consider this evening. I would look for a mover. Councillor Duncan.
I'll move first reading for bylaw number 2282, housing agreement for 2180 Beacon Ave West.
Second.
I just because we haven't read it in this before, if we could just read the.
Yeah, sure. To secure all units in the development as rental for a minimum 30 years and to secure 20% of the units as below market rentals for a minimum of 20 years.
Thank you. We have that first and seconded. Any discussion? I just want to take this opportunity to thank staff. We've been in quite the process back and forth, and did include the CRD, and did receive some advice, and I think we have an excellent agreement going forward to provide 28 affordable units that will be 20% below market for the next 20 years. I'll call the question. All in favor? That motion carries unanimous. Thank you.
Move second reading.
Second.
All in favor? Sorry, I'm gonna, I forgot my own rules. I went ahead and said something on first reading when I should have just called a vote. And so now we're at second reading, and so I wasn't asking questions or indicating how I would vote. I was making a compliment to staff. So I will turn to a question or comment from Councillor Keefe on second reading.
Thank you. I do have some reservations about this agreement. I have some concerns about the way that we're calculating the below market rents. It's interesting to hear that CRD has a different way of doing it. I'm not sure why we didn't do that in the first place. Having said that, it's a bit late now to be going back in time and doing that, so I guess that's what we'll need to do. I'm also concerned about enforceability of the agreement, and while I appreciate staff's comments about, the courts are always available to us. I mean, usually such an agreement would indicate what potential penalties or whatever would be. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. And that we are giving the developer a considerable lift in the value of their property in exchange for this. Having said all that, at this point in the game, I think it's taking a bit of a leap of faith at this point to move forward with this. This is the first time that we've entered into a housing agreement with a for-profit organization, and I hope they will be good partners. I hope staff will have the capacity to be following up on this. I would anticipate on an annual basis to make sure the terms of the agreement are supported. So with those comments and reservations, I will plan to support the motion anyways. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I just further to what Councillor O'Keefe said, as it is something that we don't really have, and in the CRD here, we don't really have a prior format for. I think it's something we can go forward with, as a leap of faith in offering kind of a different way of doing things, because we know that it's going to take a diversity of solutions and a diversity of things that we can try to get around our housing crisis. And if this works, if we work out a viable model, it's terrible to be the first people and have to be the ones who work out the kinks, but I think all the people involved here have the intelligence and the goodwill to do it. That I think that we could come up with something that perhaps others will be able to go forward with. That again, if the CRD doesn't have capacity and doesn't have the format to do the housing agreement they're doing, if this is one that works, then it will be one that other people can copy as well. And so I'm willing to go forward with this and see what works. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. I'll make a comment now that I'm supportive of this, and again, I want to commend staff on the work that they've done with the developer. I've commented on other applications and in response to members of the public who reasonably request that we provide more affordability in the housing developments that we provide. And Council has extreme limited options in making housing affordable. And my comment has been repeatedly, and I sit on the CRD board, and I also sit on the board of the CRD Housing Corporation. And to provide affordability in a for-profit development without external funding from the province, from the federal government, is almost unheard of. And we have taken a substantial period of time to come to this agreement. Staff have commented that this is a legal agreement. We do have remedies if necessary through the court system. But I want to thank the developer for coming to the table and actually listening and moving forward on Council's recommendation to move forward on a housing agreement from the start of this process. And we have had other developers that we have asked when they came forward on multi-unit buildings if they would consider some of the units being affordable, and they just said it does not work economically. And we, the town, did not have an outside funder, as I say, the province or the BC Housing or the Ministry of Housing or the federal government, CMHC, to bring those to bring funding to create affordability into projects. Many of the CRD projects do have those sorts of external funding. So I'm very supportive of this, and I'm confident that that the developer, having come to the table, acceded to council's desire to have an agreement and taken the time to work with the town on this particular agreement, that they will want to demonstrate good faith in seeing these as affordable units in our community, and I hope it's something we can celebrate publicly in the coming years ahead. Seeing no further comment, I'll call the question on second reading. All in favor? That motion carries unanimous, and motion for third reading.
Move third reading.
Second.
It is moved and seconded. All in favor? That motion carries. This will also come back for final adoption at a future council meeting. Thank you. I'm now turning to section 6, which is development permits and development variance permits, and under 6A, we have development variance permit application number DV 100336 and development permit application number DP 100840 at 2312 Orchard Avenue to increase maximum lot coverage and reduce minimum front yard setback to allow construction of a 4-unit multifamily residential building. We have this has come before council and gone to our advisory planning commission and come back, and we have gone out to notice to neighboring residents, and we've had no written submissions. I would therefore look to a colleague to move the staff recommendation.
I'll move that development variance permit application number DV 100336 and development permit application number DP 100840 at 2312 Orchard Avenue to increase the maximum lot coverage and reduce minimum front yard setback to allow construction of a 4-unit multifamily residential building be approved, subject to conditions as per council resolution number 2024.36.347.
Second.
We have it moved and seconded. I'll turn to the mover and seconder for any motivation. Councillor Gurnett.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to point out that of the two variances, appreciating the comments from our APC, Advisory Planning Commission, the lot coverage does make the building shorter, which is important for the neighborhood, especially the people living to the west. And as far as the front setback, allowing the protection of the trees at the northern and west corner, and hopefully as provided in 3E and F on the resolution, that as much effort as possible be to help protect and retain the trees that are currently there, and I'm assuming the arborists will do the best they can to make that happen. So I will be supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gurnett. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? That motion carries unanimous. Thank you. We're now turning to item 6B, which is development variance permit application number DV 100358 and development permit application number DP 100845 at 9667 5th Street to relax maximum height, maximum number of stories, maximum height of stairs in the front yard area, minimum setback for accessory building, and minimum parking space setback to allow construction of a 3-story, 8-unit, multi-unit residential building. We do have one written submission that was included in the agenda package, and as I indicated during approval of the agenda, we've had 3 additional written submissions since the agenda was published last Thursday. I will turn to first I will turn to staff if there is anything they wish to add at this stage.
No, I think the variance is in the agenda package. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, Council, we do have the option, under the recommendation, it is that the DV application be approved, and that's something we do need to consider first, and then it continues that the DP application be approved subject to the conditions. We do have the option to separate if council wishes, a council member wishes to do that. So I'll leave it to the wishes of council to move either the recommendation or to separate the recommendation. Councillor O'Keefe.
I just have a question for staff, if I may.
Please go ahead.
So one of the the recommendations from APC, and it's in our recommendations as well in regards to other things, was looking at the 10% common amenity space. And what I'm wondering is, based on the current plan.
Sorry, we just lost your audio, Councillor Keefe.
Oh, sorry, okay. Am I there?
Just your last question, the start of your last sentence.
Okay. So I was wondering about the 10% common amenity space and how close the current development is to meeting that, and wondering whether staff believe that's something that's easily accommodated, or whether that's something that might require a significant redesign to get that 10% in there.
I'll turn to Ms. Verhagen.
Thank you. Through the mayor, I don't have that number offhand about what percent of the property is used for common outdoor amenity space for the residents. The plans may need some amendment to get there, but as you indicated, that was part of APC's recommendation and part of council's resolution as a condition of the development permit that they revise accordingly. If the development permit is approved, then that condition would apply. Thank you.
Oh, okay, thank you. And then just one other, sort of a process question. We had a request that we should also be considering OCP design guidelines 25.4, 16, 17, and 18. If council also wanted to include those in the conditions, would that be as a motion arising or amending the emotion?
Sorry, could you make reference to those design guideline numbers again, please, Councillor?
That was in the letter that came from
yes, thank you.
Mr. Carlson, I believe.
Yes.
25.4.
No, I'm good.
16, 25.4.17, and 25.4.18.
Yes, thank you.
And so the question was, if we wanted to incorporate those, what would be the process? So as a motion arising, or should that be included, or an amendment to the motion?
I'll turn to staff. Mr. Edwards.
I think that it could be up to council as whether it would be simply basically making a recommendation that be included, or the design be amended if necessary, rather than rejecting it at this point in time. Or council could choose to do that if it wished.
So one option for council would be the second part of the recommendation is, and the DP application be approved subject to the conditions as per council resolution. I won't give the number, and then you could say and include those particular references. Thank you, Ms. Nelson. Mr. Edwards.
Yeah. Okay.
Terry,
Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn to council if there are any other questions. Okay, I'll leave it to council's pleasure to look to make a recommendation, whether it's the entire recommendation or the first part.
Okay.
Councillor Garnett.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it. I'll move that the development variance permit application number DV 100358 be approved. And we'll just separate them if that works.
Yep, thank you. Do we have a seconder?
Okay, second.
We have it seconded. I'll turn to the mover and seconder.
Yeah, when we initially came forward, I did have reservations about the amount of variance requests. It was initially 6. I did not like the interior side yard setback, which we removed down to 5. And unfortunately, it was spoken to in public participation, 3 of the variances in terms of height height of the stairs and the stories of the building are all because of something we as a municipality require, which is flood construction level, based on the area this proposal is going to take place in. So it's difficult for us as a council, or for myself anyways, to say you can't have these variances when we're essentially asking the developer to build to a certain height that promotes those things happening. As far as the other two, the shed, you know, the way it's situated, keeping the shed, not having to throw it away into the landfill, reusing it. They've now separated the bikes from the garbage and the recycling, promoted it to be at the back so it can be accessed easily from the lane. And as far as the parking variance, my concern about not going ahead with it is if we force them to go within the confines of what's provided, they'd be coming for a parking variance possibly, because they require 8 and would that limit it to 7. And then would there be parking in lieu and payment? And we already know how the public feels about not providing adequate parking. And the fact that the parking's on the back and taking away that driveway from the front actually promotes a little more on-street parking, which could benefit this proposal as well in terms of extra parking. So as far as the variances go, the concerns I had with the amount of them, I think I can find reason to find why, for 3 of them for sure, I can see no problem with, but the other 2 I've looked at from different perspectives, and I'm able to support them now at this point in time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Turn to Councillor Duncan.
Yeah, thank you. I think we had a lot of discussion about this application, and the developer has been responsive in recognizing that we've received additional feedback from the community and from the neighbor adjacent. The feedback received is not, as Councillor Garnett has mentioned, the specific variances are not affected by these variances. The overall height of the building and the number of stories were essentially set during the OCP, and when this zoning was changed, and when the province said that we are allowed, we had to start putting additional density on these lots. The variance for this height, I don't think is something, when we looked at it, it's necessary for flood construction level. It was necessary to provide living space within these, and the additional height is not something that I would actually be concerned that would cause shadowing or massing in excess of what would have been there in the first place, especially for the neighbor on the south, knowing the tilt of where the sun will be during the summer. It's going to be on the south, so the shadows are going the other way, and then when the sun is lower in the north during the winter months, that's usually when we're cloudy anyway, and the shadows are very long anyway. So I think a 2.5-story building, it was going to be what it was in the first place, and these variances aren't going to affect anything above what was already going to be allowed in this OCP. And we have comments regarding design and things from the OCP that I think we'll be addressing with the development permit application. With regards to appearance, this is always a thorny one because everybody has a feeling about what looks appropriate in a neighborhood, but again, this is something that's come back to the OCP and working with the development community on kind of what is becoming standardized, and this one is within what is becoming typical. So I'm okay with this. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. I'll turn to Councillor Duck and then Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mayor. And yes, as my colleagues have noted, that we're kind of put in a position where the variances are what's required to do this, especially the flood construction level. And this area of town has been set up to take on more density, and unfortunately for those, as was pointed out in public participation, there's going to be some overlap relative to people living in single-family residences and developments next door to them, and that is troubling. But we kind of don't have a choice now that the OCP is in place, and this is kind of the direction we're going, and are directed by the province to get more density. So it's unfortunate. I think we lost a bit of the design flair that was in one of the initial versions, which had a bit more of a peaked roof and kind of fit in with the neighborhood. But I understand why it has to be done that way relative to just making the whole building fit within the flood construction level and the needs of that the developer wants to do in putting enough residences in place. So I will be in approval of this going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. So I did have considerable concerns about this at the last meeting. This afternoon, I went and listened to the APC discussion about this all over again to see where they had landed on things. And APC did not have significant issue with the height. They did, the stairs was okay, or the stairs they were kind of split on. The stories was okay, but in the end, I think those three are all sort of wrapped up, as colleagues have said, with flood construction levels. You have to make the building higher, and so that means more stories. It means higher stairs. So it seems like it's an unavoidable thing. The other thing that there was concern about was the side yard setbacks, and that has been addressed. And APC had no issues with the parking and the other setbacks for the small building. So based on that, I'm fine to allow this. There was other things that they seemed more concerned about the 10% amenity space, the design features, but that will be covered under the DP. So for I'm happy to support the variance at this time.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I will speak now and start by saying I'm not supportive of this motion. And while I've been supportive of the process that we've gone through, I do want to make reference to the recommendations or the recommendations and the record of decision from the Advisory Planning Commission. And so the Advisory Planning Commission's first motion, and again, I wanted to acknowledge that our Advisory Planning Commission is a citizen-appointed body of 9 community members, and 8 members were eight of the 9 members were in attendance during the meeting on this project. And the first motion that they approved was that owners and tenants of occupation of property within 75 meters be notified regarding the development variance application and the various variances. They did omit one of the variances, and that was one of the side yard setbacks. And so they were approving 5, that notice going to neighboring property owners for 5 of the variances, not 6. So they were supportive of that, and when that came back to council, I was supportive of it because this is a unique development application. We have gone through the process of the provincial legislation, amending our zoning bylaw. This property, and staff, please correct me if I'm in error, but this area, this block on both sides of 5th Street were not amended due to provincial legislation. It was the previous zoning that the town of Sydney had in place to allow increased density that was what we were going by. So this has not been imposed, and I just want the public to be clear that this density is not being imposed by the provincial legislation. It was our previous zoning. And so I was supportive of that, and we do have the feedback. The Advisory Planning Commission was also supportive of a variety of conditions which are included, well, they're not included by name, but they were included in the resolution, and we spoke to them at a previous meeting. There's several of them. And they were supportive of those conditions. However, when it came to the important motion of recommending to council that they consider approval of the development application, it was a split vote. So it was split down the middle. And in local government, a split vote, whether it's at the council table or at a advisory committee meeting, means the motion is defeated. And so it was not a recommendation for council to consider approval. And for me, that has some significance, is that there was, while we can watch the meeting and listen to the comments, we have to take the motions that have been passed by the Advisory Planning Commission and consider those. So I did take note of that at the time, but I was still in favor, as the commission was, of sending notice out to residents to gain feedback, because that feedback is helpful in council's consideration. While the Advisory Planning Commission is itself 8 members of the community who come together and with detailed reports from staff make recommendations to council, it's important to hear from the community directly as well. And we have received four submissions, which I'll come to in some respect in a moment. So my concern, and some of the concerns expressed in the record of decision, which is not embodied in a motion from the Advisory Planning Commission, but is a record of decision that they have consensus on in terms of it being part of the record, is with respect to the variances, commission members were divided in their support. There was split support on the massing and aesthetic design of the building, with some thinking it was overbearing and others felt it was appropriate. Again, similar to the motion that was split in terms of aspects of the development, including the variances. There was the concern, there was split concern that 6 variances arose so soon after the zoning bylaw passed by council on June the 30th. So again, I mentioned at the outset that the zoning bylaw that was passed on June 30th provincial legislation did not have implication on this property. We still had the opportunity to amend the zoning bylaw, and so there are 6 variants. There were 6 variances, and I should say 5 now, because one has already been not approved by, or not recommended approved by APC, and council followed that recommendation and did not approve it in going notice. So it could be said that there is concern from me that there are 5 variances that arose so soon after the zoning bylaw was passed. And so when you consider the particular variance requests, there's a request for 0.2 of a meter. I don't know what 0.2 of a meter is, but it's something like this. For the rear setback, so that the proper turning distances can be provided in the parking. The proper turning radius can be provided, and that there can be glasses are good enough. They're not. A planting of a certain width between the parking spaces and the property line, and a 1.5 meter pathway between the parking spaces and the building itself. So I think it's very reasonable to have a 1.5 meter pathway between the building and the parking spaces, and I think it's reasonable to have a planting area, and I don't have a concern about the 0.2 of a meter for that. The other variance with regards to the setback for an accessory building, I really don't see the point of it when I look at the development, but that's not going to turn my decision. My decision is with regards to the height and the number of stories and the elevation of the stairs. And yes, the original request was made. So the first development proposal that came to council that was referred to APC was for a height variance increase of 0.54 meters and to go from 2.5 to 3 stories. And the justification included the recommended height in the FCL report. Well, the FCL report is a reality that developers are going to have to deal with. And the FCL report may limit the density on a property under what we have provided in our zoning bylaw. And so by allowing additional stories from 2.5 to 3 stories and allowing additional height, we can say that it's because of flood control level, but we've already considered flood control level in our zoning bylaw and the density that provides. And so perhaps, I don't know, because I'm not the engineer who does flood control level, and I'm not the developer who designs these buildings, but perhaps there cannot be, there could not be, under our height restrictions, 8 units, 4 units under the 2-story units. Perhaps there can only be 4 units on this current single-family residential lot. Well, guess what the province did? They recommended that they didn't recommend, they stipulated that we would have to allow 3 or 4 residences on single-family lots of a certain size, and this lot is of that, does meet that particular requirement. So I was intrigued when this development came forward from the applicant in that he was trying to bring additional density to that, smaller units on the ground floor that don't have outdoor living space, that might be more affordable because of the size of them, because of not having outdoor living space and that so on. But what it does is it creates a massing, it creates possibly the design elements of the building itself that quite frankly are not in keeping with what we envision for the future of the neighborhood. And so I'm in favor of the developer going back, of not approving the variances and not denying the development permit application, but requesting that the applicant go back and look at what a proposal what a development proposal would look like without the variances. Because if out of the gate, after we've updated our zoning bylaw on June the 30th, we're willing to provide 5 variances on this property, we are going to continue to see variances, and probably for a number of stories and height if we're providing them for this. One more minor aspect for me is in receiving the letter from Mr. Carlson this evening where the references, I do actually want to make specific reference to it. The design of open space should, this is one of the residential guidelines, the design of open space should emphasize usability with convenient access from the interior of units so that open space can be used as part of everyday living. Where private outdoor space is provided, it should be delineated and screened. That's fine. Outdoor living spaces should be visible from the interior of the dwelling units in order to, we are approving a height of stairs of, I'm sorry, if I stand corrected, I believe it's 1.6 meters or 1.5 meters. To me, that begins to question whether it actually conforms with that particular residential guideline. I would leave it for staff to comment on that. I'm not asking for their opinion tonight. I'm just indicating that when you provide these variances that they do have implications and could have implications with regards to the guidelines. So I will leave my comments there and respect the views of my colleagues. I will turn to colleagues for a second time, if they wish. Councillor Duncan.
Yeah, thank you. For the variance permit application, I'm going to maintain my vote. It was good. That was good discussion and good rationale that the mayor has provided regarding the APC and their split decision. But I'll maintain my vote because I don't believe that when we were able to do the zoning bylaw and the OCP that we included flood construction level at the fine-grained level that would allow for changes in density to have been taken into account in the first place. Flood construction level is always something that a property developer needs to work out and have an engineer sign off when they come up with their plans. And so we know that there's going to be some variability by property and by blocks, whereas the zoning bylaw is covering, larger areas, and the OCP even larger areas than that. So I would be quite hesitant to start saying that developers would know ahead of time that they were supposed to lower their density to account for that. They would look at the density, they would look at the number of units they were allowed, and then take the flood construction level into account after that based on the specific property they were dealing with and the actual measured ground level that they encountered. So I think it would be an uncomfortable precedent to set to say that they should have known that ahead of time. Granted, I think that as council goes forward and as APC reviews development applications as they go forward, this is going to continue to be a case-by-case and fine-grained thing with that interaction between what's zoned and the flood construction level and how it's being applied, because some of that sense of was 0.5 meters or 0.9 meters above the approved is a 0.5 or a 0.9 meter variance acceptable to council and APC, the neighborhood, and we kind of go with a gut sense and a rationale. Whereas if they'd asked for 1.2 and given you know, the flood construction level, perhaps we'd have come down in a different way. And unfortunately, I don't think we're going to be able to take the human element and kind of our judgment out of each application as it goes. But I would be hesitant to say that it's being taken account ahead of time, and that by definition, a developer should have known to, or should expect to decrease their density, particularly in this housing market where we know that with the land values, materials costs, and labor's costs as they are, and the huge pressure that's being put on us at all levels of government and society to increase housing supply, that a decision that's going to go towards reducing housing density for half a meter of height is just one that I can't take, and I'm going to overbalance in the direction of the increasing density. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. Mayor brings up some interesting points, and I'm reflecting on some of the other comments I heard at APC, and specifically about flood construction levels. And as members noted, that this is something that the developer would have known about and should have accounted for. So I tend to find myself agreeing with many of the mayor's comments. While I recognize that the demand there is for housing, also thinking about some of the comments that APC members made in regards to, you know, we need to balance that with having developments in neighborhoods that are livable, that fit in with the neighborhood. It's not a housing at all costs situation. So I find myself, considering that maybe supporting the variance is not the direction I want to take at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I want to speak for a second time. I'll turn to Councillor Duck first for a second time.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And yes, I know this is a tough one, but you know, flood construction levels are something we impose on the land, and even if a single family house was to be rebuilt on next door or down the road, they would have to be at a higher setting. And we've given the same sort of consideration to other major developments in Sydney because of that flood construction level. And yes, it does present an imposing building, but that's the direction we have to go relative to what we have to do in preparation for sea level rise, because that is coming. And with that, we have to compensate both the people that are living there and at the same time provide enough housing for people. So this is an RM5 zone, so it does allow for that kind of density of housing. And I think the variances are fair within what we're requiring. And yes, it is, I think Councillor Duncan said it earlier, is we're setting sort of groundwork here that we'll have to live with or not, but it'll sort of give us some guidance. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. I just want to provide clarification on my previous remarks. I should have had the information at the ready, and I did make reference to the variance request with regards to height of stairs. And the request is to go from 1.2 meters to 1.95 meters. And 1.95 meters is 6 feet 4 inches. And so if you were to look at the front of this building, which is in our agenda package, you will see the front outdoor living space for the unit that is on the second floor, and stairs are going up to it, 6.4 feet, actually on the ground level, right in front of the window of the different residents on the ground floor. And I think that's what the Sydney Community Association's residential guidelines that they were highlighting were starting to speak to. Again, I would want comment from staff, but just my observation of that is you start to have concern about the livability. What is the livability in the situation? So I just wanted to clarify my comments. I'll leave my remarks there. And not seeing any other comments from colleagues, I will call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Keefe and myself are opposed. The motion carries. And so, council, we now have the development variance permit to consider. Councillor Gurnett?
Yep. I'll move the development permit application number DP 100840 be approved, subject to conditions as per council resolution number 2024.36.347 and
Sorry, 346?
point 36.347.
Go ahead.
And keeping into the OCP residential guidelines of 25.4.16, 25.4.17, and 25.4.18, if that's all right with the corporate officer. Thank you.
Do we have a seconder to that motion?
Second.
I did see Councillor Duck second, so thank you, Councillor Duncan. So we do have the mover and seconder. I'll turn to the mover and seconder.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I think it's been mentioned previously that OCB designation land use is neighborhood townhouse, RM5, in the zoning bylaw, townhouse residential. So it does allow for 2.5 stories. I personally, sorry. Well, staff wants to make a comment.
Sorry, I'll turn to Ms. Verhagen.
Sure, thank you. Just to clarify, the OCP designation of these properties is multifamily residential, not neighborhood townhouse. So
I'm sorry, I was referring to the land use map.
yeah, the OCP designation is multi-unit residential.
The land use map actually
Oh.
refers to as neighborhood townhouse.
Okay.
That's what I'm referring to. Sorry, not your.
Thank you.
I may have said it wrong. Sorry. Thank you. Yeah, sorry. Lost my train of thought.
No, take your time.
So 2.5 stories, and so it's going to be a taller size building anyways. And this whole block up and down is zoned that way now. There was an extensive engagement period from 2020 to 2022 when this was shown in the land use map, and through the zoning bylaw process. So it's not like it can be a surprise that this potential height could happen here. I'm not going to speak to flood construction level again because that's already been spoken to. I do share some of the concerns about the aesthetics. I preferred the pitch, but the flat roof is actually lower in height, so will cause less shadowing potentially if that's possible. And there are other buildings just up the street and just down the street that also have flat roof. So it's not completely out of context with the neighborhood. In fact, the new 36-unit condo building right behind the bowling alley actually has flat roofs as well. It's going to be a difficult change. It's for sure. I think a lot of the comments that have been, I had the same reservations at first as well. But I do like some of the changes they've made, and I do think the Sydney Community Association made a good point about the privacy in the front of it, because you're right on the sidewalk, so there needs to be some allowances for privacy for people if that's their outdoor space. I can absolutely see that being a problem, and it's not housing at all cost, but I do worry about if you provide 4 units on this lot. The reality is, if you compare it to just up the street, those all sell for $1.7 million. So my hope is by having 8 units, and the developer, when they first presented, said that they had intimated they were hoping these would be rentals, which is the greatest need we have in our community. I'm also cognizant of the fact that the units on the lower level are quite a bit smaller. So if they do go for sale, they will be considerably less, and hopefully the rents will be too if it goes to the rental. And we often talk about adaptable units, but this is actually a plan that has accessible units, and we don't usually see that. That is something for me that's really different, and I think it's really important. And I'm hopeful that, I know they only have to have 1 accessible parking space, but I'm hopeful that maybe the space that's to the southwest can maybe be attached to the other accessible unit, so that, you know, there's a space for somebody if both accessible units are rented out or owned, they have a parking space for both of them, because even though it's close to town, that doesn't mean a whole lot when you have accessibility needs and you rely on your vehicle because it's specially made. So those are things I'm considering when I'm looking at this. And those are my comments for now, Mayor, and I'll leave it there and let others talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gurnett. Councillor Duck as the seconder, and then I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I think Councillor Garnett has covered all my points on my checklist, so I have not much to add, but just to reinforce that the comments provided by Mr. Carlson in the letter, I think are important for staff to and the developer to give consideration to see how those can be integrated into the development. But nothing more than what Mr. Garnett, or Councillor Garnett, had to say. He covered all of those things, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I just want to clarify the motion that was read in. Did it I thought Councillor Garnett mentioned resolution 2024-36347. And did he? Because I think it's supposed to be 346.
So I'll turn to Ms. Nelson because I have
It should be 346.
346. 346. Sorry.
347 was for Orchard, I believe.
No, very good. Thank you, Councillor. Did you?
Okay.
You still
Just
have
wanted
the-
to make that clarification. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you. I'll speak briefly because I motivated primarily on the last motion. But I think I would very much in favor not approving this development application. And given that there were 5 variances to approve this application, given the province has mandated that we will be reviewing our zoning bylaw and our official community plan again in 2025, it would be appropriate to consider this RM5 zone in this part of our community, and whether we need to amend it, because I don't think we should be, after this precedent this evening, be considering ongoing variances of height and height and stories, and there may or may not be setbacks associated with it. When we've gone through the process we have over the last 2 years of 3 years of doing our OCP and our zoning bylaw. I'll leave my comments there. Thank you. Councillor Duncan.
Yeah, thank you. I'm still going to approve this. As Councillor O'Keefe as has been pointed out, this is potentially floated as rental unit. And I'm happy that the community association is looking at, keeping us advised and double checking the OCP requirements, and that, we've added them to this recommendation, and hopefully the developer will be able to satisfy them to staff's, or satisfy staff. However, when we're talking about rental units, we get letters from people in the rental market, and I have the same criteria when I'm looking for myself in the rental market, and is the rent I'm gonna pay less than the actual amount of money I earn this month? That's actually the criteria most renters are looking at here in Sydney. And for me, and for other people with children, are there enough bedrooms that I will be able to legally rent this place, given that I have 2 children of different genders, and Canadian housing rules are such that each child over the age of 12 must have their own separate bedroom. I am also not allowed to put myself and my spouse in the living room. I must legally rent 3 bedrooms, or I will not be able to keep my children. I know this is something families look at. No renter has ever written us a letter about a development application for rental where they were concerned about the aesthetics of the building, where they were concerned about the outdoor living space or anything else. All they're concerned about is this gonna be am I gonna be on the street, or is this gonna be a place I can live? So while I appreciate that other people are looking out for those sort of things, and it is something, we don't wanna build things that are going to be unlivable for generations. Hopefully in a generation or 2, things will ease up for us again. I do have to keep in mind what really matters. And so for me, it's getting people in houses, and livability means it's watertight, it's warm enough, it has electricity and running water. The paint color, the shape of the building, whether it's pretty enough and the staircase might block a window, is very secondary. And especially it's very secondary when I'm talking about the affordability of a unit. Anyone who's ever lived in a cheap rental knows that's why it's cheap, right? There's something about it. So I'm not going to block developments like this if they're going to be getting me potentially rental housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. Sorry, Councillor Duck.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just to confirm, Councillor O'Keefe had suggested an amendment to this recommendation to include the design requirements as suggested by Mr. Carlson's letter. I don't recall them being read in, so I just want to check with Councillor O'Keefe if she still wanted to include those and to see what the current motion reads. Thank you.
So I'll try to provide clarification, Councillor Duck. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett. Did you not include?
I'm just looking at the corporate officer to confirm, and yes, I did include them.
Yes.
Yeah, Councillor Duck did include them, or Councillor Garnett did include them when reading the motion, but thank you for the clarification.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. I'll now call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor O'Keefe and myself are opposed. The motion carries. Thank you for the deliberation, Council. We're now turning to adoption on number 7, adoption of minutes. I've looked for a mover and seconder that the minutes of our September 9th council meeting be approved.
So moved.
Second?
Any corrections? Seeing none, all in favor? The motion carries. Thank you. We're next turning to number 10. Under 10A is the Mayor's report, and it is the CRD Board highlights from the September 11th CRD Board meeting. I have nothing to highlight from those highlights, or to highlight further from those highlights, and we are receiving it by virtue of it being on our agenda. I appreciate that the CRD includes links to all of the reports, the video, and so on from the meeting for those who may be interested in further information on any of those topics. I'm next turning to number 11, Councillor reports, and under 11A, I'm turning to Councillor Duck to provide us an update on Tree Appreciation Day, please.
Thank you, Mayor, and it was my pleasure, along with my colleague, Councillor Garnett, to attend the 5th annual Tree Appreciation Day held in Sydney. What a beautiful day, and amazing, and we had 50 people out, representing 9 different municipalities in the Capital Regional District, which was, again, amazing that those people would give up their time to come out to Sydney and help green our parks. In the process, 32 trees were planted in the park, and I recommend to anybody in going by that neighborhood to just do a drive-by, because it's substantially changed the appearance of that park, and it looks outstanding. It's amazing. Another 50 trees were planted in the forest, so in total 82 trees were planted. I think we owe a great thank you to the staff that were there, the town staff that were there, and I'll mention Mike, Cliff, and Christy, who were there, among other town staff. They did a great job in preparing the land ready to accept those trees. I mean, it was fun. I mean, that group planted the 32 trees in about an hour, and so that was all because of town staff having it ready to go. They had the chips there, they had the soil there, they had the trees there, the holes were all pre-dug, and it was just fun. It was an enjoyable event. But most of all, I think we owe a great thank you to the Victoria Green team for putting this together and organizing and getting people there in combination with the town of Sydney to carry this out, because it was a great event, and we should be proud of what those people did and the way the park is going to look in the future, because it's quite an amazing, attractive change. In addition to the planting of the trees, this group of people removed another 6 cubic meters of invasive species. And to give a reflection on that, Mayor and Councillor Garnett, you may recall that you attended a invasive species poll in the same park a few weeks ago. That invasive species poll resulted in a tandem load, 2 big dump trucks full of invasive species being taken to Heartland for disposal. And you might note that that volunteer labor was free. The contractor from the town provided the tandem truck, and it cost us $26 to drop that off at land at Heartland. So a pretty good outcoming for this park, and a great vote of thanks to both the people who came out from the 9 different municipalities, the town staff that helped out, and certainly the Victoria Green team. It was just a wonderful event, and I would turn to Councillor Garnett to see if he has anything to add.
Thank you, Councillor Duck.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Duck. Just to not forget Clayton, another town staff member who was there. I want to make sure if we're going to name them, we name them all. No, just same thing. It was a fabulous day, and the people, the energy and the positive feeling that just from doing this it's just amazing to see people be that happy when you consider what's going on in the world. It was a great positive experience. And as Councillor Dunk has mentioned, just if you drive by, if you knew what it looked like before and to look at it now, it's like night and day. It's so different. And to think how those trees are going to grow over time. And there were people saying, we almost want to put a plaque where we planted the tree. Like, we feel like this is our tree and we're going to follow its growth. And I'm like, that's a pretty interesting story, and it's a great way to look at it. So, it's just fabulous. And thank you again to town staff and to the Green Team. It's awesome. Thank you, Mayor.
I just want to add, Mayor, that Scott and our Councillor Garnett and I have planted our tree, and we've named it, so we know which one in the park is ours.
Okay, thank you for the tag team, Councillor Duck and Councillor Garnett. That very positive report. We're next, we don't have any committee reports this evening. We do have an important staff report under item 13A, which is the Lochside Water Main Replacement project, and I will turn to Ms. Clary, please, for an introduction.
Good evening. The town is replacing the Lochside water main. This water main is located through a culturally sensitive area that's a historic First Nations village site. The town made the decision several months ago to use a pipe bursting technology to minimize ground disturbance. However, excavation pits are still required for the pipe bursting to enter the ground. Through the pre-excavation, to excavate these pits, a significant amount of cultural material was identified. As a result of that, it has taken longer, and costs are higher than anticipated. So the contractor, PW Trenchless, has been through their work schedule, and they provided some additional scheduling modifications and to cover additional costs with respect to their work, as well as archaeological and cultural monitoring. We will require an additional $648,000 to complete the work as planned. Staff are also considering using a MSC wall to place some of the cultural material back on within the historic village site. For that, we do have an approved budget in the 2025 in the financial plan to do in 2025, and we are recommending that be brought forward to this year, that $100,000, so we can start that work as well.
Thank you, Ms. Clary. I'll turn to colleagues if there are any questions. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Ms. Clary, for the report. The $648,000, given that what we've gone through in terms of costs we weren't anticipating, is there a contingency built into this at all?
There is a contingency, not super large, but we think it will be sufficient for the amount of work that we've encountered so far.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. If there are no further questions, we do have two staff recommendations. Councillor Duncan.
Okay. I move that the town's 2024 to 2028 financial plan be amended to increase the capital budget for WAT 20001 Lochside water main replacement by $648,000 funded from the Growing Communities Fund. And two, that the town's 2024 to 2028 financial plan be amended to bring the $100,000 capital budget for PRK 22002 waterfront walkway wooded. Is this supposed to be wooden? Okay, wooden retaining walls replacement into 2024.
Second.
Moved and seconded. I'll turn to the mover and seconder. Any further discussion? I want to thank staff for bringing this report forward. I'll call a question. All in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. Under item 13B, we have the monthly building report for the month of August. We're receiving that for information on our agenda this evening. There's no verbal reporting out or motions for council. We have no items under correspondence for council consideration. We do have 6 items of correspondence under correspondence for information for both council and public's information. We are receiving those, and that concludes our business for this evening's meeting. I would now turn to a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.